I used to be proud of how strong I was. Not loud strength. Not the kind that demands attention. The quiet kind. The kind that endures. That adapts. That keeps going without asking for anything in return. I told myself that was maturity. I told myself that choosing not to react was wisdom. That staying calm meant I was in control. That avoiding big decisions made me responsible. For a long time, I believed that. I believed strength meant holding things together, no matter how heavy they became. So I held. I held my doubts. I held my anger. I held my desires until they softened into something manageable. Every time life presented me with a choice, I reframed it. Not what do I want? But what can I tolerate? Tolerance became my metric for success. If I could live with something, I chose it. If it didn't hurt too much, I stayed. If it didn't demand change, I accepted. I thought I was being strong. I wasn't. I was avoiding the responsibility of choosing. From the outside, my life looked stable. I didn't jump from one extreme to another. I didn't chase fantasies. I didn't burn bridges. People trusted me because I was consistent. They knew I wouldn't surprise them. They knew I wouldn't disrupt things. I wore that like a badge of honor. Consistency felt safer than conviction. But something strange happens when you avoid choosing for too long. Life doesn't stop asking. It just stops waiting for an answer. Decisions get made around you. Paths close quietly. Opportunities assume you're not interested and move on. And because nothing dramatic happens, you don't notice the loss. I didn't feel trapped. That's what made it dangerous. I felt capable. Functional. Needed. I told myself that wanting more was selfish. That questioning stability was ungrateful. That discomfort was something to outgrow, not listen to. So I stopped listening. I became very good at explaining myself out of things. I'm fine where I am. It's not the right time. I don't need that. Those sentences protected me. They also shrank me. The first crack appeared in a moment so small I almost missed it. Someone asked me about a decision I had made years ago, one I used to defend passionately. And I realized I couldn't remember why I chose it. Not the practical reason. The real one. The reason that felt personal. It was gone. All that remained was habit. That scared me. Because habits don't care who you are. They just continue. I started noticing how often I said, I don't mind. I don't mind where we go. I don't mind what we do. I don't mind staying. At some point, I don't mind stopped being flexibility. It became erasure. I didn't argue anymore. Didn't insist. Didn't imagine alternatives. I had trained myself not to feel the friction that comes before change. I mistook that numbness for peace. There were nights I lay awake, not anxious, not sad, just alert. As if some part of me was standing guard, waiting for a decision that never came. I told myself this was adulthood. That life wasn't supposed to feel intense forever. That calm was the goal. But calm without direction isn't calm. It's suspension. I realized I hadn't chosen my life in years. I had let it settle. Settle into routines. Settle into expectations. Settle into a version of me that could exist without too many questions. And the scariest part? People praised me for it. They called me grounded. Reliable. Strong. No one saw the truth. That my strength wasn't courage. It was fear, disguised as endurance. Fear of choosing wrong. Fear of closing doors. Fear of discovering that even if I chose, I might still be dissatisfied. So I chose nothing. I stayed in between. Between wanting and acting. Between knowing and admitting. Between living and maintaining. I told myself that as long as nothing was falling apart, everything was fine. But nothing falling apart doesn't mean something is being built. One night, sitting alone with no distractions left, the thought arrived without drama, you're not strong. You're just afraid to choose. That sentence didn't hurt. It clarified. Because suddenly, everything made sense. Why I felt tired without being exhausted. Why time felt fast but empty. Why my life felt intact but distant. I hadn't been living carefully. I had been living undecided. And undecided lives don't collapse. They fade. Quietly. Responsibly. With no one to blame. That's when I understood something I had never allowed myself to consider: avoiding a choice is still a choice. And I had been making it for years. Once that sentence settled in me, "You're not strong, you're just afraid to choose," everything changed texture. The same days. The same people. The same responsibilities. But now they felt exposed, like a stage after the lights come up. I started noticing how often I avoided decisions by framing them as patience. I told myself I was waiting for clarity. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for confidence. But clarity never arrived, because clarity isn't something you wait for. It's something you build by acting. I saw how often I let other people decide for me, not forcefully, just conveniently. They suggested. I agreed. They assumed. I adjusted. No conflict. No tension. And slowly, no direction. I realized how deeply I associated choosing with loss. If I chose one path, another would close. If I committed, I would be responsible for the outcome. If I acted, I could fail visibly. Avoiding choice protected me from that. Or so I thought. In reality, it was costing me something far worse than failure. It was costing me ownership. I didn't feel like the author of my life anymore. I felt like a caretaker, maintaining something that already existed, keeping it functional, preventing collapse. Caretakers don't ask what they want. They ask what's needed. And I had trained myself to live entirely in that question. What's needed? What's reasonable? What keeps things stable? I started to resent stability. Not because it was bad, but because it had replaced movement. I noticed how my body reacted whenever a real decision appeared. My chest tightened. My thoughts raced. My instinct said, delay. Delay felt smart. Delay felt safe. Delay felt like control. But delay had become my default answer to life. I wasn't choosing not to choose once in a while. I was choosing it every day. I replayed moments from my past with a new lens. Not moments where I failed, but moments where I stepped back at the edge. Where I almost spoke up. Almost left. Almost started something that mattered. Those almosts accumulated. They didn't hurt loudly. They settled quietly. Like dust. I began to feel a strange anger, not explosive, not dramatic. Focused. Anger at how easily I had confused endurance with virtue. At how proudly I wore my ability to tolerate dissatisfaction. At how I had turned survival into an identity and called it strength. That anger wasn't destructive. It was clarifying. Because it forced me to admit the darker truth: I was afraid of wanting something badly enough to act on it. Wanting creates stakes. Stakes create vulnerability. If you never choose, you never risk being wrong. But you also never risk being right. I had built a life where nothing demanded that risk. And nothing inspired me either. The moral dilemma arrived without fanfare. It wasn't a dramatic crossroads. It was a quiet realization with no audience: if I keep living this way, nothing catastrophic will happen. And that's the tragedy. I would continue being praised for reliability. Continue being needed. Continue being calm. And slowly lose any sense of authorship over my own life. Or, I could choose. Not knowing if the choice would be correct. Not knowing if it would lead to fulfillment. Not knowing if it would make things worse before they got better. Choosing meant responsibility. Responsibility for disappointment. Responsibility for regret. Responsibility for outcomes I could no longer blame on time or circumstances. That responsibility terrified me. But something terrified me more. Reaching the end of my life and realizing that nothing truly belonged to me, because I never claimed it. I started to test myself in small ways. I chose quickly when my instinct said yes, instead of analyzing it to death. I said no when something drained me, without explaining why. I allowed myself to disappoint people instead of disappearing behind politeness. Every time, my body reacted as if I were doing something dangerous. Heart racing. Hands cold. A familiar urge to retreat. And every time, nothing catastrophic happened. The world didn't punish me for choosing. It simply responded. Sometimes with resistance. Sometimes with relief. But always with reality. That's when I understood something I had never truly grasped before: strength isn't endurance. Strength is deciding who you're willing to disappoint, yourself, or others. I had spent years choosing to disappoint myself quietly. Because it kept everything else intact. Now I was faced with a different choice. Disrupt comfort, or continue erasing myself politely. Neither option was painless. But only one involved honesty. I didn't feel brave. I felt late. Late to my own life. And that feeling didn't push me into a dramatic leap. It pushed me into a refusal. A refusal to keep calling fear strength. A refusal to keep living undecided. I didn't yet know what I would choose. But I knew this: I could no longer pretend that not choosing was neutral. It was shaping my life, and it was shaping it without me. I thought choosing would feel like relief. Like finally exhaling after holding my breath for years. It didn't. It felt like standing alone in a wide, empty space where excuses used to live. Because once you choose, there's nowhere left to hide. No, maybe. No, later. No, it just happened. Just you, and the consequences of your decision. I didn't suddenly become decisive. I didn't wake up confident. What changed was quieter. I stopped calling my fear strength. That was the turning point. I stopped praising myself for endurance. Stopped admiring how much dissatisfaction I could tolerate. Stopped pretending that being unbothered meant being at peace. I saw endurance for what it was in my life: a way to avoid accountability. As long as I endured, I didn't have to answer for anything. I didn't have to explain why I stayed. Why I settled. Why I never stepped forward. Endurance let me disappear with dignity. And I had confused that disappearance with maturity. Choosing didn't arrive as a grand declaration. It arrived as refusal. Refusal to keep drifting. Refusal to keep outsourcing my life to circumstances. Refusal to keep calling fear being realistic. I began choosing without waiting for confidence. Confidence never came first. Action did. I chose when my voice shook. I chose while doubting myself. I chose knowing I might regret it. And yes, sometimes I did. Some choices led to disappointment. Some to loss. Some to uncomfortable consequences I couldn't undo. But something unexpected happened. I felt real. Even regret felt different when it belonged to a decision I had actually made. I was no longer angry at time. No longer resentful of others. No longer confused about why my life felt distant. I was inside it again. The calm I had once prized disappeared. In its place came something messier. Uncertainty. Responsibility. Presence. Presence is heavy. You feel more. You doubt more. You can't numb yourself as easily. But you also stop fading. I noticed how my days changed texture. Moments lasted longer. Choices carried weight. Even boredom felt earned instead of imposed. I was no longer waiting for my life to begin. I was participating in it, awkwardly, imperfectly, late. There were days I missed the old version of me. The one who didn't risk disappointment. The one who was always reasonable. The one who never made waves. That version was comfortable. But they weren't alive. They were careful. They were respected. They were absent. I understood then that my biggest mistake wasn't choosing the wrong path. It was believing that not choosing was neutral. It isn't. Not choosing is a choice, one that hands your life over to inertia. Inertia doesn't destroy you. It preserves you in a shape that no longer fits. I didn't suddenly find meaning. Meaning isn't something you discover after you choose. It's something you build by continuing to choose. Again. And again. And again. Even when you're tired. Even when you're unsure. Even when it would be easier to go back to enduring. I still feel fear. Fear hasn't disappeared. But it no longer gets to call itself strength. Strength, I learned, is not how much you can tolerate. It's how much responsibility you're willing to carry for your own life. If you're listening to this and something feels uncomfortably familiar, if your life looks stable but feels suspended, if you're praised for endurance while slowly disappearing, this is what I wish someone had told me sooner: you don't get rewarded for waiting forever. You don't get credit for enduring a life you never chose. And calm is meaningless if it costs you presence. You don't need certainty to choose. You need honesty. Honesty about what you're avoiding. Honesty about what you're afraid to lose. Honesty about how much of your life you're letting happen without you. I thought I was being strong. I wasn't. I was afraid to choose. And that fear nearly decided my entire life for me. Choosing didn't save me. It didn't fix everything. But it gave me something I hadn't felt in years: ownership. This life, messy, unfinished, uncertain, is mine. And for the first time, I'm not enduring it. I'm living it.